Hello, Paul J. Bennett here, and I thought this week on my Facebook Live, I thought I might talk about some of the authors that have inspired me over the years. Some of these go back quite a few years, so some of them are more up to date in terms of when I read them. Some of these I haven't read for quite some time. Some of them I've read multiple times. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. To give this some semblance of organization, I've divided these books into three main categories. There's no real order to them other than just the order I thought of them. But I thought at least by splitting them up it would be a little easier to talk about them. So the categories I have here are historical fiction, which I really enjoy, science fiction, and then finally fantasy. Of course, fantasy has a much bigger impact because of what I'm writing, but I thought I would leave the best till last. So I'll start off with historical fiction, and many years ago, I don't remember exactly how old I was, I got started on the C.S. Forester books. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with his work, C.S. Forester wrote mainly about Hornblower, who's a British officer during the Napoleonic period. Now, C.S. Forester did write other novels, some very fine ones. In fact, The African Queen was one of his, which was made into, of course, a famous movie. And he wrote other books about World War II and so on. But in particular, I think it was the Hornblower books that really inspired me. I kind of like the idea of having a series where the protagonist elevates in rank as the series progresses. And I really liked that element of it. Probably one of the first series that I ever read, as opposed to just standalone books. Now, of course, probably the biggest influence from a writing perspective would be this fellow. This is, of course, Bernard Cornwall, well known for his Sharp books, of which this is the very first one I ever owned. It's in pretty ratty condition because I've read it so many times. And this is Sharp's Eagle, which was the first Sharp book that was published. Now, this is not a first edition or anything by any means, but I did buy this long before there were many more books in the series. Of course, they made an excellent TV show out of it with Sean Bean. I read this book long before the series was out, the TV series. In fact, I can remember it being out and about somewhere. I don't remember where. It might have been I don't know, I can't even remember. It might have been a bazaar or something like that. Anyway, there was a TV on and Sharp was playing and I didn't even know they'd made a TV show out of it. So then I had to try to dig up copies of that. Of course, now I own the whole series. Sharp, once again, interesting character. He comes from a background that's not really upper class. In fact, he's from the poorer section of society, but he manages to carve himself out a career in the British military during the Napoleonic period. And of course, at that period of time, everything was about money. So he struggles. Very interesting stories. Like I said, big influence on me in terms of the way I like to read and the way I like to write my stories. He also, of course, did do another series, which some of you may be more familiar with. It's called, well, now they call the series The Last Kingdom, although I'm pretty sure there was another name for the series originally. This was also made into a television series. There are, I think, 2 or 3 seasons, and Netflix is going exclusive for the last season. Very good series once again. This series is interesting in that it's written in first person. So it's written by someone called Uhtred of Babenberg, who's the son of Uhtred, who has kids named Uhtred, and so on. That's all explained in the books. Very interesting story. The TV show is good too, but I would rate the book superior to the TV show. Very, very interesting. Oh, and I should point out, for those of you, I did mention Sharp. If you watch the Sharp television show, the stories differ quite a bit from the books. In particular, let me think, which one is it? It might be Sharp's Company. Interesting story. The author was only halfway through the book when they decided to make it into an episode. So the first half of the book matches the first half of the TV show, and then they go in different directions. But both are quite interesting. I should point that out. The TV show had a few episodes that were a little strange, but some really good ones, and some original TV ones as well that weren't covered in the books. Bernard Cornwall is probably my all-time favorite historical author. I'm only partway through War of the Wolf because I've been busy writing my own book, so it takes a little bit longer to get through a book. This one is actually one that was lent to me by someone. I usually get them in ebook format, but since this was loaned to me, I thought, why not? And so that's a good read as well. There are lots of other authors, of course, and I don't want to feel like I've left anybody out, but really I'm just talking about the ones that influenced my writing style, not just my favorite authors, but ones that had an influence on me as a writer. Another series very similar to C.S. Forester is Alexander Kent. These are the Richard Bolitho books. So in this series, we see the rise of a naval officer, very similar in fact, in some ways, to Hornblower. But there are a lot more of these books, and actually it follows the career of Richard Bolitho all the way up to his death, and then I believe it's his nephew takes over the storyline. So very, very interesting, and of course it covers off a longer period of time, so it goes right up to the Napoleonic and even after the Napoleonic period is my understanding. I'm not quite up on the newest ones of this series, but once again another very interesting series. Another historical fiction, Con Golden. He's still writing, he's still pumping them out. He's lots of interesting books in particular, and he has many series, but this one about Genghis Khan really took me by surprise. Somebody actually bought me the first book. This I don't think is the first one. I can't remember the name of the first one. Took me by surprise. I was not expecting to enjoy it so much, but wow, what a story. Very, very interesting. I couldn't put it down. I got into the rest of the series as soon as they were available. So very, very interesting, good storyteller. I really liked his style of writing. Another author who you may not be as familiar with, he's actually, I believe, a Canadian author too, is Jack White. That's White with a Y, not with an I. And he has two series that I quite enjoyed. The first is the first series is called, let me see, A Dream of Eagles is the name of the first series. It essentially covers off a sort of an alternate version of King Arthur and his knights. So this includes the Saxon Shore, Lothar the Frank, and a whole bunch of other stories as well. Once again, very good read. They also can be really thick too. You can see how thick this one is. This is another series he did called the Templar Trilogy. Now, if you like reading about, you can go online and find information about Lost Templar treasure and Rosalind Chapel and all these things. Well, he kind of wraps this together and tells an interesting story about the later days of the Templars. It's a trilogy, so it's 3 books in the series. This is the first one, The Knights of the Black and White. Once again, I found his writing style to be very, very interesting and very unique. I don't know, I'm not even sure if Jack White is still alive, to be honest. And unfortunately, when you look up these books on Amazon, not a lot of detail to them. But they are quite a good read, and I think you would find them quite interesting as well. Moving on to science fiction. I don't remember when I started in science fiction, but I know I was pretty young. There's many authors that I found quite fascinating, but I think 2 of my favorites were Robert Heinlein, or Heinlein as some people like to say it, and this is probably my all-time favorite Heinlein book, Starship Troopers. This one's, like Sharp, is a bit ratty. It's seen better days. It's been lugged to school and back in a packet. I think it's one of my wife's favorite Heinlein books as well. Oh, is this yours?
Yeah.
Apparently this is not my book. This is my wife's book. She read a lot of Heinlein as well. So yeah, really interesting story. This one is not a series. It's just the one book. And he makes some interesting comments about society. Heinlein was kind of known to have some strong political views, but just the way he approaches things in this is quite interesting. Now, if you've seen the movie, let me tell you right now, the movie has very little to do with the book. I enjoy the movie, don't get me wrong, but it's not really the same movie. Okay, so this is another book that I've read multiple times over the years, and I'll probably go back and read it again. Of course, now I'm looking at it, and I think I want to read it right now. So yes, the other one, and unfortunately I don't have a copy to show you, is Isaac Asimov, one of the biggest science fiction authors ever. Most of the Asimov books I read typically belong to either my brother, who's an avid reader, or borrowed from friends, because at the time I was reading them, I didn't have a lot of money at the time. My all-time favorite Asimov books are the original Foundation trilogy. Now, this is a really interesting set of books. It postulates that there is a science called psychohistory where you can predict future events by looking at society. And so this fellow, I don't want to give too much of the plot away, he predicts the sort of defeat of this grand galactic empire that exists in the beginning of the story, and that some new thing will rise out of the ashes, so to speak, and become big. Very, very interesting. Once again, it covers, the books themselves cover an amazing period of time, and eventually he added additional books, but originally I believe there was just the 3 books, and then he added to them later on. Of course, you can't really talk about, I'm obviously a C.S. Forester fan. You want Hornblower, but you want science fiction. This is where you go. David Weber, the Honor Harrington series. I can't understand why this isn't a series of movies already. It should be. I believe they were in development at one point, but I don't know what happened to it. So this follows the career of a woman named Honor Harrington in a space navy that is very much modeled on the Napoleonic British Navy. Of course, it's spaceships. There's a little more to it, but they have the same sort of rank structure. Once again, this charts the progression through the ranks of the what's called the Manticoran space naval. Manticore is the sort of space empire, whatever you want to call it, that she lives in. So this is the very first one, Honor Harrington, and she is sent there essentially in disgrace, uncovers something, and I don't want to give the plot away. Very good read. Interestingly enough, when they were looking at making a movie and or show about it, they actually decided to start on the second book because there's not a lot of ship action in this one. Still a good book though, and I will warn you, once you get hooked in this, you'll be stuck in it. Now, David Weber created something called the Honorverse, which is the universe in which this story takes place, but he also has all these other stories that take place with secondary characters, and that's something that I really enjoyed. And so I did that with my own books. So you have the regular Heir to the Crown books, but you also have the Mercerian Tales, which are essentially background on some of the other characters. These books and the other Honorverse books aren't so much as background, they're more additional stories with the characters, and they delve in everything from spying to other ship commanders and so on. So very, very good series. Now I'm going to throw in something that you might not expect. Believe it or not, a Star Trek book. Now, I want to qualify this. Some of these books are not the greatest works of art. This particular one I really enjoy, which is, I'll talk about it more in a moment. When I was in the military, I was in the Air Force for 12 years, and for a large portion of the beginning, when I was in barracks, for training and so on, all the guys in the barracks would be reading Star Trek novels. Anyone who liked science fiction, because they were cheap, you'd loan them out. They were a quick read. Once again, some of them were really bad, some of them very good. This particular one is one of my favorites. It's another book I've read quite a few times. It's called The Final Reflection. Now, what makes this story interesting is it's written from the point of view of a Klingon. But this was before the Next Generation came out, before all those other movies came out, before all that stuff with the Klingons was fully developed. There was a game called Star Trek the Role-Playing Game, produced by a company called FASA, F-A-S-A. They're no longer in production. They had to come up with a lot of background to explain Klingons from what we know. Now, Klingons only appear in a couple of the original series episodes, and they were in the Star Trek motion picture, the first movie, but they weren't really detailed. So this guy filled in the details, and he did a really interesting job of doing it. And because it's told from his point of view, the main character is a Klingon, as you can probably, I don't know if you can see the cover very well, but he's one of those old-fashioned Klingons that you see in the original series. Now, later on in the TV show Deep Space Nine, they retconned the whole thing and kind of excused out the differences between why Klingons look different. But this was done before that, and it's a very interesting story. John Ford, I believe, has written many other stories, not just Star Trek. I think he may have even written a Star Wars book. I won't swear to that. But this one is really good. This is another book that I've read multiple times. So it's kind of neat because he develops their culture in a way that's very different from the TV show, yet still quite interesting, and it seems logical, at least on the surface anyway. Now let's move on to fantasy books. Now you might think fantasy was the biggest influence on me. Certainly fantasy had a big influence on me, but actually, to be honest, I think the historical books were more of an influence in terms of writing style. But there's lots of books here that I would mention. Of course, you can't talk fantasy without talking about Tolkien. JRR Tolkien, one of the biggest influences. And, by today's standards, some of the Lord of the Rings drags a little. I mean, it takes the entire first book, half of that's traveling across the wilderness. World building is amazing. It drags a bit in the beginning, but man, once you get into this series, you cannot put it down. And one of the things that I really liked about the series was once you're done, they have all the appendices, everything about the heirs to the crown, background on their history, and of course, Tolkien later expanded on that with the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, both of which I have somewhere. I don't know where. So, those are really cool. Now, let me just say, I did like the Peter Jackson movies. I know they're not quite the same as the books, still entertaining, but I think the books are still better in some ways. Oh, here we go. Just found Unfinished Tales. There we go. So, now Unfinished Tales and the Silmarillion is really not one storyline. It's more of a collection of stories that you would use. There's Unfinished... Oh, we got 2 copies of Unfinished Tales, apparently. I'm not sure how that happened. I bet you one of these belongs to my brother. He's probably going to see this and want it back. So I know he's read them, of course. In fact, he's the one that turned me on to JRR Tolkien in the first place. Another writer, another author that I found very fascinating, believe it or not, was Edgar Rice Burroughs. Now, he's most famous for writing Tarzan. Didn't really get into the Tarzan books. This is a Pellucidar book, which is kind of a Hollow Earth kind of thing. I couldn't pull up John Carter, actually. The John Carter series I really enjoyed. It's a bit dated in the way it's written, especially gender roles and such, really. There's not a lot of plots of John Carter. It's mighty warrior, rescues princess, and fights everything in between. And at some point he gets captured. That's pretty much the summation of all the books. Still, I love the writing style. It's easy to read. Like I said, it is a bit dated. They were written quite some time ago. But one of the things I really liked about John Carter in particular is the attitude of the main hero. He would face oppression. He would be locked up in dungeons, sentenced to death and everything. And all the time he keeps saying things like, I'm alive, and while I'm alive, there's still hope. So that was a very kind of inspiring from that sense of things. A little simplistic in terms of, like I said, storyline, and the characters aren't super deep, but still an interesting story. Also, the concept of having ships flying through the air and so on are well done. Now, of course, a couple of years ago, they did do John Carter, the movie. I enjoyed it. It did pretty poorly at the box office. We're probably never going to see them make another one, at least not with those actors. I quite liked it. I'm not saying it's the best movie ever, but I did like the way he portrayed the Green Martians, the sky ships, a few things like that. So I thought they did a pretty good job. Maybe we'll talk about that another time when we talk about movies and so on. So Edgar Rice Burroughs is certainly up there, if only for having a hero that never quits. Now, we also have another real influencer was Katherine Kurtz. And Katherine Kurtz, once again, has written many stories. My favorites, though, I think, are the Darnay series and Camber series. The Camber of Coldie series are actually my favorites. This is the first one in the Legends of Camber of Coldie, which is literally called Camber of Coldie. What I like about this book is it has the same sort of, nobility and so on in their society, but at the same time, they have these powerful mage users. Of course, in this case, they're a race of well, technically they're humans, but they call them the Darnay, or Darnay, depending how you want to pronounce it. and fascinating storyline, interesting characters, real depth to them. It follows essentially Kemper and his family. And they're sort of the last of the Darenai, if you like. This is kind of a race that's dying off, and they've held power for a very long time. And the magic in particular in this series I found fascinating. It's not just people lobbing firebolts back and forth. It's more subtle than that, which I found very, very fascinating. So I really enjoyed this particular Katherine Kurtz series. Now, another series another book that had a heavy influence on me. It's probably one of the oldest fantasies around, and it is La Morte d'Arthur, which is all about King Arthur. This is the abridged version. As you can see, it's quite old. It's even got some pictures. Look at that. How often do you get pictures in a book nowadays? Not very often. Fascinating book. Could be a challenge sometimes to read because it's written in a very old language. But this was really inspiring to me. Reading about the different knights is really where I got the concept for Lady Beverly in the Heir to the Crown series. She's supposed to be like Sir Galahad. If you don't know who Sir Galahad is, you might want to read this. So, very, very fascinating for that reason. And anyone who says King Arthur doesn't have magic hasn't read King Arthur. There's giants in here and all kinds of weird things. So yeah, it definitely would fall into the fantasy category. Of course, when it was written, there was no such thing as a fantasy category. So that would definitely fit in there. Now, another author you're probably quite familiar with if you read a lot of fantasy, R.A. Salvatore, more commonly known for his adventures with Drizzt Do'Urden and Wulfgar and Catti-brie and Regis the Halfling, and I'm missing one of them. There's a dwarf in there somewhere. But that's not the series I actually found the most fascinating. I liked the what's it called? The Cleric Quintet. There you go. 5 books. It tells about a cleric. Now, I should preface this with these books are set in Forgotten Realms. It's a Dungeons and Dragons book. This is about a guy who's a young priest, and throughout the 5 books, he advances to become, more powerful. You can almost see, especially for me as a gamer, you can see the character progression as the books go through. Of course, it also introduced us to Ivan and Pykel, the 2 dwarves, one of which is a druid or a doodad, as he calls it. So this is quite an interesting series. There are lots of other books, of course, that I've read. In particular, I can think of the Naomi Novik books about Temeraire, which I found quite fascinating. I've never been one to really be big into the more fantastic elements of stories. So for me, a dragon needs to be big and powerful, like in Lord of the Rings, or rather The Hobbit, Smaug the Dragon. Smaug the Golden, I guess he should be called. Temeraire was an interesting series because you have a Napoleonic time period with dragon riders, which I thought was a particularly interesting take. And of course, I've read Anne McCaffrey, Dragon Riders of Pern, and other books with dragons in them. But for me, it's always been about dragons being not the main character, but a sort of a large influence. And I don't want to give too much away, but there might be a dragon in the future in Heir to the Crown. But you'll have to wait a while to come across it, and it won't be quite maybe what some people expect to see. Well, that's probably enough time. That's 25 minutes already. I was only expecting to take 15. So join me again in 2 weeks, where I'll talk about some of the movies that I enjoy, and I'll try to dig up some really old and decrepit fantasy movies, because that's all they used to have before Lord of the Rings, quite frankly. In the meantime, if you have something you would like me to discuss on these Facebook live sessions, feel free to email me at paul@pauljbennettauthor.com. Until next time, happy reading.